Hello, everyone, and welcome to a conversation on Latin America's oceans, today's greatest conservation opportunities. We're going to give a few more minutes and we're going to start. Hello, and welcome to a conversation on Latin America's oceans, today's greatest conservation opportunities. We hope you and your families are well and staying safe. We are pleased to report that everyone at AIDA is healthy and working hard on conservation issues. My name is Gladys Martinez. I'm the Marine and Biodiversity and Coastal Protection Program Coordinator. I'm joining you today from my home in San Jose, Costa Rica. So don't be surprised if you hear any birds singing. Today, three wonderful women from my team will join me to share with you our efforts and next steps to protect the ocean in Latin America. We very much appreciate you joining us today. For 20 years, AIDA has been working on environmental protection in some of the world's most vulnerable communities and critically endangered habitats in Latin America. We use the law and science to protect sensitive ecosystems and communities suffering from environmental harm. Our marine team works to ensure that marine resources are managed sustainably throughout Latin America. We accomplish this by advocating for improved policies and practices to achieve critical marine conservation goals throughout the region. Our three speakers will provide a brief description of our efforts towards ecosystem protection, especially coral reefs, sustainable fisheries, especially reef fish and harms from aquaculture, and climate change, which will be ocean-related mitigation and adaptation. As we would love for all of you to participate, following these presentations, we will be opening microphones to start an interactive conversation. So we invite you to send your name and location via the question chat if you'd like to ask your question or comment directly to our team, or feel free to write your question if you prefer for me to read it instead. You can do this in the chat at any time, and we will respond to them after the three speakers give their presentation. Please let me introduce our first speaker, Maria Jose Gonzalez. Maria Jose Gonzalez is a scientific advisor for the Marine Program. Originally from Guatemala City, Maria Jose is currently based in Bogota, Colombia. And Majo will transport us to the wonders of coral reefs and those brightly colored fish that delight divers and snorkels, and are responsible for white sand coasts. Please, Majo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gladys, for that introduction, and thank you all for taking the time to be here and to know a little bit more about what motivates us. I'll be telling you about one of my favorite ecosystems and also one of the most important ecosystems for our oceans. As we all know, Coral reefs provide enormous benefits to people and communities worldwide, including critical spawning grounds for fishes, sites for tourism, and they also buffer to protect coastal areas for damage and climate change. In addition, coral reefs directly support over 500 million people worldwide. They host more than a quarter of all marine species, in addition to many other marine mammals. And several studies have shown that the value of the ecosystem services they provide by 1 square kilometer of coral reefs is estimated between $100,000 to $600,000. However, their disappearance will have economic, social, and health consequences for all of us, and we can't really afford to lose them. As a result, over 50% of the coral reefs have already died in the last 30 years, and up to 90% may die within the next century. Half of the Great Barrier Reef has been bleached to death since 2016, with 30% lost in 2016 and the other 20% in 2017. So this is really shocking for all of us. In our American continent, most of the coral reefs belong to Latin American countries. These are found in Brazilian waters, the Caribbean Sea, and the Eastern Pacific Ocean. Next slide, please. Thank you. And although the faunas and the reef structures are unique in each region, the natural and human impacts affecting them are similar, resulting in marked reef degradation in most areas. Next slide. As you can see in this picture, coral reefs are amazing, full of biodiversity and different species that make this a unique ecosystem around the planet. Next slide. Since 2007, AIDA has provided the much needed guidance to implement effective laws and practices to preserve and protect reefs in the region. We started by protecting the rich marine life in Cabo Pulmo, Mexico. We then advocated for the protection in Latin America. And on that same year, we developed a document called International Regulatory Best Practices for Coral Reef Protection. We have also submitted several urgent alerts to governments on threats to reef ecosystems. And in 2018, we started the Reef Fish Conservation Project. This project advocates for proactive policies to protect and restore the health of our coral reefs and key species of reef fish, such as the parrotfish and other important herbivorous fish. Next slide. But why protect the parrotfish? Herbivorous fish in general help maintain healthy reefs, control the abundance of macroalgae, and support coral recruitment, which refers to the incorporation of new individuals into the population of corals. Moreover, they are natural eroders, producing sediments like white sands we see on beaches, where some species can excrete between 40 kilograms to 200 kilograms of sand per year. Scientists estimate that 70% of the white beaches in the Caribbean and Hawaii have been formed from sand expelled by the parrotfish. How cool is this? Next slide. So what do we do differently compared to other organizations? So one of our strategies is joint advocacy and close collaboration with these. This strategy has the privilege to work with international bodies and national governments, as well as civil society organizations, including kids, local communities, and fishermen. Next slide. Some of our closest allies include the government of Costa Rica, Panama, as well as the United Nations Coral Reef Advisory Authority, also known as ICRI. Next slide, please. So what are some of the highlights of our work? The joint advocacy with representatives of the Ministry of Environment and Panama led us to present a motion to ICRI for the development of a recommendation to address the decline of herbivorous fish population for improved coral reef health in the tropical Eastern Pacific, the Eastern Atlantic, the Eastern Western Atlantic, and the Caribbean region. This recommendation was presented during ICRI's 34th meeting and was accepted by consensus, and member countries organizations were supporting this motion. This recommendation is important because it recognizes the urgency to protect herbivorous fish populations in Latin America and encourages governments to establish and coordinate strategies and programs that can lead to sustainable fisheries management, including coastal strategies and initiatives to support the recovery of herbivorous fish and coral reef ecosystems. This next highlight is very dear to my heart. Meet some of the kids of the San Andres Island in Colombia. This was taken during an educational campaign that was coordinated with one of our local partners, Coralina. Coralina is the regional autonomous corporation in charge of managing the archipelago of Providencia and Santa Catalina of the Ministry of Environment. In July 2019, Coralina signed the Regulation 396 that establishes restriction for the capture and commercialization of parrotfish, other herbivorous fish, including omnivorous fish, efforts that are in line with conservation of coral ecosystems and beaches in the archipelago of San Andres, Providencia, and Santa Catalina. Next slide. This important regulation defines management measures as well as prohibitions regarding fishing activities of parrotfish, surgeonfish, angelfish, and butterfly fish. AIDA provided legal and scientific arguments that were included in the regulation, emphasizing on the importance of these key species and the importance to mitigate pressures, but most importantly, their role in protecting coral reef ecosystems. Next slide, please. But despite our many important outcomes, we still need effective laws and practices to preserve and protect coral reefs in Latin America, but most importantly, empower local communities and policymakers with legal and scientific arguments to make responsible choices that prioritize the protection of marine ecosystems. Next slide, please. So in the next 3 years, we will focus on the development of practical resources, recommendations, urgent alerts, and other tools that can improve coral reef protection. We are also going to advocate to government officials, industry, civil society to make responsible choices and promote best practices for coral reef protection. We are also going to support the establishment of replenishment zones and/or locally managed marine areas to protect habitats where important biological functions occur, such as spawning, in order to safeguard the reproductive capacity of fish and improve the livelihoods of coastal communities. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you feel a little bit more inspired about coral reefs following my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria Jose. We will have time to respond to questions regarding AIDA's work to protect coral reefs in a few minutes. For now, please let me introduce Maggie Rodriguez. Maggie is our legal advisor based in San Jose, Costa Rica. As part of the Marine team, Maggie works to promote ocean and climate resilience, which is the capacity of ecosystems to resist and adapt to climate change. Maggie will highlight key climate-related threats and some ways AIDA has worked to strengthen legal protections for key carbon sinks, such as coastal wetlands. Maggie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gladys. It's a pleasure for me to join you today. I'm also working from home, so don't be scared if you hear a cat meowing. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit more about ocean and climate change, and also to make you fall in love with the beautiful beaches of Costa Rica, since most of the pictures have been taken either by me, my father, or 2 of my closest friends, all of which have been taken at our beautiful coastline. The ocean is one of the most important and productive ecosystems on the planet, providing benefits not only to coastal populations, but the whole world, including food security, climate regulation, tourism, and among many, many others. However, the ocean is currently going through a lot of pressure due to climate change that has caused a rise in the temperature of the water and a change in the chemical composition of the ocean, putting a lot of its resources and humanity at great risk. I know that sometimes the news may be disheartening. I think that we have all reached a point where we feel there's nothing much left for us to do to improve the situation, but let me tell you, there's still a lot that we can do. Next slide, please. I've always been passionate about the environment and science. I still remember that 13 years ago, I made my dad and my younger brother sit through a documentary on climate change and how it affected coastal communities at the Boston Museum of Science on a family trip we took there. I'm pretty sure they still hate me for that. However, 13 years later, I still feel the same passion, but unfortunately have witnessed the effects of climate change on coastal communities, as foretold by the documentary and many, many other scientific resources. Next slide, please. As Gladys mentioned before, I'm from Costa Rica, which is located in one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change, Central America. In Punta Arenas, the sea level rise is threatening the main coastal city in my country. For example, the picture in this slide corresponds to a recreational facility very close to the ocean. As you can see, sea level rise has caused the ocean to claim this territory as theirs. This can also happen to many houses and other structures like hospitals or schools, threatening livelihoods and housing, and forcing thousands to move either within the country or migrate to other countries in the hopes of finding a better future. So next slide, please. However, sea level rise is far from being the only threat that the ocean and coastal communities are facing. For example, as I told you earlier, the change in the temperature of the ocean has caused grave damage. For example, chloral bleaching is a result of the rise in the temperature of the water. As you can see, the difference between a healthy and a bleached coral is absolutely shocking. As you can see on the left, we have a very well-preserved portion of the Mesoamerican reef, and it's thriving with all of the beautiful fishes that Majo mentioned earlier. However, you can see on the right, this very bleached, almost dead coral. The difference is completely astounding. A friend of mine works at the Congress at Costa Rica, and at her office, she has a climate change wall with different pictures of different impacts from climate change. They have a coral, they have a picture of a bleached coral. Once I visited her, we commented on the picture, and she told me that a lot of people react to the picture, but not many of them follow up on what we can do. I believe that many of us feel that it's not what's happening in the ocean is not really connected to us, since it's not happening on land or at our backyards. But we depend on the ocean for many things, even though we live far away from it. Next slide, please. Before we continue, let me just tell you a little bit more about the picture featured here. This corresponds to the beach of Nosara in Guanacaste. As you can see, there is a mangrove just right next to the coast. This is going to be pretty important up next. But let me tell you a little bit more about our work. AIDA has worked on protecting key marine ecosystems that play an important role in climate change, adaptation, and resilience, as Majo just mentioned, our work on coral reefs. Climate adaptation and resilience is the capability of ecosystems to slowly get accustomed to climate change, and mitigation refers to the ability to help slow down climate change. I have personally worked in partnership with the Costa Rican Vice Ministry of Water and Ocean Affairs, specifically in the process of approving the decree that broadened and ensured the protection of coral ecosystems in the country. This decree recognizes the vulnerability of corals to climate change and the urgency for their protection. During the process of the creation of this decree, a diverse group of scientists and officials of other government agencies took part on the drafting and included ideas that made the decree richer and stronger. The agencies that took, the working group was officially included in the decree. Thanks to the diversity of participants, we are able to tackle multiple threats on coral ecosystems, including, of course, climate change. This has helped us approach protection through climate and ocean science, but also through the experiences of people who have been working on the field and know about the real and urgent needs coastal communities and coastal ecosystems face. Next slide, please. Costa Rica is not the only country where AIDA has helped improve the protection of key marine ecosystems. For example, we have worked in Panama on a very similar decree that has created a working group that will focus on coral reefs and seagrasses. Of course, this has been adapted to their institutional framework. In Mexico, we have been working for many years now on mangroves and coral reefs. And in Colombia and the Guatemalan Caribbean, just as Majo mentioned before, we have worked on key coral reef fish species, all in the hopes of improving and promoting climate change adaptation and resilience in our Latin American oceans. Next slide, please. So what's next? We will continue our interdisciplinary and collaborative work promoting actions to mitigate climate change among coastal communities and marine ecosystems through effective science-based policies. Science has proved that the sustainable use of marine resources by, for example, prioritizing small-scale fisheries have significant impact both economically and ecologically. The creation of more biologically significant marine protected areas and ensuring that the existing ones are adequately managed and can allow the recovery of key species and ecosystems can have a huge impact on climate action. Restoring and protecting key ecosystems such as mangroves, as the one I showed you before, and coral reefs can also have a huge impact on our fight to tackle climate change. Next slide, please. ILO will continue to work on oceans and climate change, taking into account the momentum given last year by the negotiations that took place on the biggest climate change forum in the world, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, that has opened the dialogue on oceans and climate change. We will also continue to work on protecting key marine ecosystems through MPAs and other effective science-based policies. We may not be living on the ocean, but it's thanks to a healthy ocean that we are able to live on the planet. Thank you very much. And next slide, please. And this picture here is a beautiful white sands beach that is the product of our amazing friends, the parrotfish that were mentioned before. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maggie. We will answer questions regarding the role of oceans and climate change after our next speaker. And please, a friendly reminder that if you would like to ask questions directly to our team, please send name and location via question chat. Our next speaker is Florencia Ortúzar. Florencia Ortúzar is our legal advisor in Santiago de Chile. Florencia will enlighten us in ways to protect the highly sensitive Magallanes coastline in Chile's Patagonia, and will show us some of the threats affecting this pristine area. Thank you, Florencia. The floor is yours.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk to you about this amazing place called Patagonia. I'm sure some of you might have had the luck to see it, to visit it. And I'm also going to talk about one of the threats that is actually threatening this place. So next slide, please. So first of all, to put you into context, Patagonia is a really remarkable place. It is the largest and most rugged fjord region in the world. It is full of channels, islands, and archipelagos. Because of all the ice fields and lakes, it is one of the most important freshwater reserves as well. So the next slide, please. There's also an amazing biodiversity in Patagonia. There's most of the biggest cetaceans in the world, such as the blue whale, the humpback whale, and the sail whale, among others. There's penguins, there's seabirds, there's loads and loads of biodiversity. And one very particular and special thing that I like a lot, which is not so well known, is that there's also a very unusual presence of cold coral reefs in Patagonia. So cold coral reefs are a bit more rare than normal coral reefs, and they usually, when they exist, they are at depths that complicate research. But here in Patagonia, you can find them quite shallowly, and this is one of the reasons why Patagonia is a hotspot, because these coral reefs are provide habitat for other species. So the next slide, please. So now I'm gonna, one very remarkable thing about Patagonia is that it is one of the least studied marine regions in the world. This has to do with the fact that it is very, very remote. It is located at the end of the world, literally, and the climate is very, very harsh. And also because it's such a rugged area full of fjords and islands and channels, it is very difficult to go there. So it's not been sufficiently studied. It's actually one of the last wild places on the planet. According to the Wildlife Society, the Wildlife Conservation Society, there's only around 23% of the area of the planet still wild, without counting Antarctica. This is really something to be worried about. Apart from the fact that it seems just not right that we humans will intervene all of the planet, it is also very important for our planet to be able to recover some of its health, to keep these places wild, and hopefully to have more wild places. This has to do with the fact that these places help mitigate climate change, which is obviously a big threat for the whole environment. And because they produce ecosystem services that are really key for all of us in the world, such as clean air and clean water. And they are also very important refuge for the diversity of life. So it is very, very important to preserve Patagonia. So now the next slide. Now we're gonna go into the more difficult part of this presentation, which has to do with this very grave threat that is salmon farming in Patagonia. So Chile is the second largest producer of salmon, and salmon is an exotic species. We don't have it naturally here. But the thing is that this fish really thrived in the cold waters of Patagonia. So the industry grew very, very fast in around something like 20 years. So from nothing to becoming the second largest producer of salmon only after Norway. And it's also today one of the most important industries in the country. So obviously, with this growth being so fast, there was no scientific background to follow up. I mean, not enough scientific background. It was just too fast. So this means that there is very, very weak legal and institutional framework to regulate and sanction the industry. And actually, all the regulations being elaborated after crises that have affected the industry. We've had like different types of crises. They are all over the news every now and then. We get this virus called the ISA virus that kills half of the salmon population. Then we have parasites. Then there's like these infections. There's all type of problems affecting the industry, and it obviously has to do with the very lax regulations and the really bad sanitary conditions. So the problem is that because the salmon industry started to create so much problems in the first regions where it began producing, they started moving further south, more near to Patagonia. And now most of the new concessions want to be located in the south of the country, where most protected areas are. So the thing is that because this industry is happening in a very remote area and also underwater, the destruction that is happening is virtually invisible. So it's very different to what you get when you see, for example, a deforested forest. You say, oh, and it really moves you and ignites you into action to do something about it. But here, everything happens underwater, so it's like happening under the rock. So the conscience of the people is very low. There's also a big problem with salmon having this like fame that is very healthy to eat. So people really can't like make the connection about salmon being bad for you because of all the chemicals that they give to the fish, but also because of the really, really bad damage that it is causing in Patagonia. So, well, that's one of my personal campaigns, is to try to convince people that there is sushi beyond salmon. So the next slide, please. Well, now we're going to go into some of the worst impacts of the salmon industry. First of all, the industry will never be sustainable because to produce 1 kilo of salmon, you require around 5 kilos of wild fish. It's a carnivorous species, so it can't grow without eating all this amount of proteins. And a friend of mine who is a scientist was once explaining to me that they had tried to give it less protein, but the fish came out blind or with other malformations. So there's no way you can produce salmon with not so much wild fish, and that's a big problem. Also, because the salmon produce so much organic material because of the feces and the pellets that they don't eat, which is obviously also full of chemicals and antibiotics. All this material sucks the oxygen from the marine space where the concession is operating. And when there's not enough for how many fish can be in each marine area, this generates anaerobic conditions. That means that there's not enough oxygen in the area to sustain life. So today, if you dive below the salmon farms, you can literally see deserts where nothing grows. This also has to do with something very, very serious. That is the massive fish mortality produced by deadly toxic algae or red tides. If there's people from Chile listening, you will know that we have regularly news on this. And sometimes we get these red tides that virtually kill everything. They kill fish, they kill seafood, they kill even birds and even whales. And this has been very well linked to salmon farming by scientific research. It has to do with the amount of organic material plus climate change, which is a given nowadays. And then there's also the problem of the fish mortality. Salmon farms, like with all these red tides that have been happening, get like a lot of mortality, and the traditional system to dispose of that mortality just can't, get totally overwhelmed. So salmon farmers end up chucking all this dead salmon in the sea, which obviously generates more anaerobic conditions. There's also the problem of escapes. It also occurs regularly and it's in the news. Salmon, just because of the bad weather, salmon escape, and that means that those carnivorous fish are out there preying other marine fauna. And then there's also a lot of waste that they produce that they just discard. And this type of image that you see there is something that you do find in very secluded places along the Patagonian coast. It's very, very bad. And finally, well, there's the antibiotic. The Chilean industry uses a ridiculous amount of antibiotics on fish, and this is really being considered like a big, big problem by the World Health Organization, which is really, really worried about antibiotic resistance, by microbial resistance. So the next slide, please. So, well, about what are we doing about this? We are focusing our efforts in Magallanes because it's the most pristine area, because all new salmon concessions are being installed here, but also because it's the most fragile area, because it's less used to this human interaction. It is more fragile to the same interaction. So we have produced scientific information. We have denounced anaerobism that companies and the government have not taken seriously at all. And we have also informed international authorities, environmental conventions that Chile has signed of what is going on. So we are asking those conventions, such as the Biodiversity Convention, the convention that protects whales, turtles, etc. A lot of conventions that Chile has signed to protect the environment, which are not being complied because what is happening with the salmon industry. And we are asking them for their help to support us with scientific evidence to help the government better regulate this industry. So now, the next slide, please. We're going to continue doing all this work in coordination with our allies, but what we want to do now is to focus ourselves on marine protected areas. Chile did like a big jump from having only 4% to 40% of marine protected areas in the country in only 6 years. This is really, really good news, but there are no adequate management plans for all those areas. So what is the good of having so much marine protected areas if there's not enough, if there's not good management plans? And actually today there is salmon farms admitted in these protected areas. So what we want to do is to work with the government and with our allies to pressure them into really protecting marine protected areas. The next slide, please. And now I'm going to explain why this is really, really important to do now, and also why we think it is a good moment to do it. Well, it is a good moment to do it because we have no more time. We have to act for the environment now. We all know that. But also because the international climate negotiations that are going on every year have finally recognized officially that oceans are important. It sounds ridiculous, but it just happened now, as Maggie was explaining. And Chile happens to be the president of these negotiations, at least until next year. You must remember that Chile was going to host the last COP, which is the meeting that these people have every year, and we couldn't do it, but still, we are still the president. Chile is still the president of the negotiations. So this means we have an extra leverage point to push Chile to really protect these marine protected areas, because we need them in our struggle against climate change. Not only Chile needs them, but all the world. So last but not least, this terrible pandemic that we're living is produced so much suffering everywhere, but it has also given us an opportunity. And it is because the economic inertia that is always going on and that we thought would never come to a stop has finally paused. So now there is an opportunity for the economic reactivation to be truly green and in favor of the environment, to make things different. And the Chilean government has actually expressed that it is putting into place plans for the reactivation to be really green and in favor of the environment. So here we have an extra leverage point that we will not leave with unattended. So that's for now. I'm very happy to answer any questions, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Florencia. Now we're gonna, we'd love to hear from you. So we're gonna start with the questions. We have one question from Margarita Green from Chile. Margarita asks, why are coral reefs dying?
I can answer that one. Well, there are a lot of factors that are coming into account when it comes to damage that coral reefs are having, but we can just place them between two main threats. Climate change that has caused a rise in temperature of the water, causing the coral reefs to bleach. Bleaching is a completely normal process within coral reefs. The bleaching consists of them expulsing the algae that lives in symbiosis with the corals. But what is happening is that the stress caused by sea temperature rise is causing for this phenomenon to be more common and more deadly. We have also ocean acidification, which is a change in the chemical composition of the ocean that is causing coral reefs to be less resilient, and they grow slower, and they cannot get back when they receive any physical damage. Also, we have to tackle threats that have been caused by humans directly, for example, overfishing. That goes hand in hand to what Majo was talking about during her presentation. I don't know if you girls want to add something to that.
Thank you very much, Maggie. We now have a question from Andrea Ruiz from Oakland, and she wants to know, what about the poor people that do not respect quotas for fishing?
I can answer that one. I think that's a very interesting and important question, because one of the things that we need to remember is to include the social aspects in the conservation or management actions that we're trying to make. Even though AIDA is mostly focusing on policy outcomes and these regulations that we need, we are also trying to tackle like both sides of the governance structure. So the top-down approach includes the norms and the regulations, and the bottom-up approach includes involvement of the local communities and local organizations. So we also, as I showed in my presentations with Colombia, this is what we're trying to do, and part of the communication campaign was to contact, restaurant owners, hotel owners, local communities, local fishermen associations, and we tried to tell them about the importance of protecting herbivorous fish species, as this is going to benefit their fishing of commercial species. So this is not about prohibitions, it's about also a changing in behavior and trying to involve them as well and empower them as local communities, as they have the knowledge to help us also with our legal and scientific arguments. We also have a human rights department in AIDA, and we also try to communicate with them as much as we can so that we can integrate the whole aspects of regulations, the science aspect, and the human rights aspect. So this is kind of what we're trying to do and how we approach, the kind of actions and initiatives that we're working on.
Thank you very much, Maria Jose. We now have a request to open microphone from Kate from Florida.
Hi, yes. Thank you so much. The presentations are very informative, and I really appreciated you sharing that information. A common theme I heard throughout all of the presentations was about ecosystem protection. And I was just curious, what impacts can marine protected areas have on climate resilience, climate change, and just the serious implications are in the news a lot. So I just wanted to see if someone could just shed some light on the connection there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. If you want, I can start. I think that this is a question that all of us can answer, and we'll have a lot to say about that. But I think it's just to start with, MPAs are, the role that they have is to preserve the marine ecosystems. Of course, as Majo said, it's not about prohibition. It's not about, fishing will stop completely, the use of marine resources will stop completely, but we would need zones that are completely closed down so it can allow the ocean to heal. It's really, really simple. If you get sick, you're a super fit person, you eat healthy, you're super healthy, and you get sick, I don't know, with a flu, or just use the example as now with COVID, it's probably that you won't have a lot of complications, and you will be able to get back in your feet real soon. That's resilience. In the case if you're not that fit, you don't have such a healthy lifestyle, it's probably the chances that you will have a lot of complications are higher. It's the same with the ocean. If we have a healthy ocean, it can face the threats that climate change is causing. But if we have deplenished ecosystems and overall unhealthy oceans, of course, climate change will cause major complications. I don't know if you guys want to add something.
I'd like to add something. Quick. I think that in the end, nature will heal itself if you only leave it to do it. And I think a very, very good example of that is what we've been seeing with the measures that countries have taken for the sanitary crisis, for the pandemic. You have seen that the skies have cleared out, that even animals have appeared where they had left years ago. So this shows how quickly nature can heal itself if you only leave it to be. So if you have marine protected areas, it's like buffer zones where nature can be reborn and then start healing to the rest of the planet. So it's very, very important, actually. It's a nature-based solution.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit more to what Florencia was saying, I completely agree with what she was saying. Even though marine protected areas are not like seal areas, they can be also impacted by climate change as well. They are areas that are where the stress is reduced, so species can ultimately adapt to these changing, aspects about climate change. So you can move from certain pressures. They can be controlled areas where also scientists can help track climate change or the effects of climate change in the long term. And they are also low-tech and cost-effective adaptive measures, strategic measures that you can use to protect conservation.
Thank you, ladies, very much. Thank you, Kate, for your question. We have a last question from Stephen from Florida. Stephen wants to know what's AIDA's biggest challenge working to stop the salmon farms to protect Patagonia.
Okay, that's one definitely for me. Well, there's a lot of challenges. I guess one of the biggest challenges might be the area that we're trying to protect. It's very far, it's very remote, and it's very rugged. So actually, even the government authorities have a very hard time trying to regulate it. Like, imagine to get to one concession, you have to have a ship at the end of the world, pay for petrol, oil, or whatever, which is very expensive, and then navigate maybe 8 hours to get to one of those concessions. So it's very difficult to do the monitoring and overview and sanctioning of this industry. So even if we have good regulations, which we don't have, it will still be very difficult to make them be implemented correctly. So that is why we have to really work in raising the conscience. People understand that it's really in their favor to protect the environment.
Thank you very much. And we deeply appreciate your interest and support in AIDA's marine work. We will share the presentations with you, and please, if anyone would like more information or have any suggestions, do not hesitate to contact us. We look forward to continue communicating with you. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Please receive our best wishes during these critical times from all of us in AIDA. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.